Good morning. I hope you are doing well. I hope you had a good weekend. Today is Sunday for me. You're going to be watching this on Monday or whenever you watch it, but today's Sunday for me. It is the 11th of February. And today I wanted to talk about the principles. And this video is coming up because a client that I've been working with for a while who gets these emails said, I feel like I'm missing something because I don't know what these principles are. And I explained to them that that is an example of my insecurity uh, to commit to say that I share something called the three principles. So, because I'm doing my best to, I guess you could say, overcome that, actually get beyond it, not really overcome it, just get beyond it and just kind of stand for something. This is what I stand for, kind of planting my flag in the ground. I wanted to do this video about the principles. And some of you have been with me long enough to have heard about the principles, but I'm going to do my best to say it in a way that's new and fresh. And this way has been kind of occurring to me over the last couple of days. So we'll just see how it goes. Um, and I want to start with defining principle, right? So I got my little dictionary, my little color Oxford English dictionary out, and I looked up principle. And there's three different definitions. And the first definition is a law, rule, or theory on which something is based. So I guess what I would say is uh, that's kind of foundational. You know, that points to the fact that a principle is foundational, to my mind. The second definition is principles, rules, or beliefs that govern the way you behave. So we all have our principles that we stand up for, our values, how we see life, what we see as far as right and wrong, black and white, good and bad. And we will stand up for our principles. You know, someone, maybe you've said or you've heard someone say it's not about the money, it's the principle of the thing, that sort of principle. And then there's the third definition, which is a scientific theorem or natural law that explains why something happens or how it works. And that's the definition that I'm going to be speaking from. So when we talk about the three principles, we're talking about a natural law that explains why or how something works. So I have this paper here that I use with folks, and it says principles and why they are important. So it says the three principles describe an underlying foundational explanation of how the human mind works. And that's what we're going off after here. We're looking at how the mind works at a very fundamental, basic level. And it also says these are laws of nature, hence the definition that I just read. And then there's a little quote here from Stephen Hawking that says, unlike laws made by humans, the laws of nature cannot be broken. That is why they are so powerful. And when we think about principles, one principle that gets used a lot as a comparison is the principle of gravity, because we all get gravity, right? We all know that if I open my hand, this thing is going to fall. And we all know that that will happen 100 times out of 100. So if we look at, there's a list of principles are, and I just want to touch on each one of them in reference to gravity to kind of show where I'm pointing when I talk about the principles of the mind or the principles of mental well-being or the principles of human experience. It doesn't matter. It's foundational for all of them, right? So let's kind of go through the list. The first one is principles are pre-existing, which means that it was true no matter what, before you knew about it or before you realized it. So if we think about being a kid, a child, if you've ever been around a baby that's sitting in a high chair, they start to learn, about gravity when they knock something off their high chair and it hits the ground, and they think it's hilarious because then you pick it up and it becomes this game. They knock it down, you pick it up. And they start to realize that if they hit it, it will fall and it will hit the ground. Now, babies have no idea why that happens, but they start to get a feel for this truth that knocking something off a table, a high chair, makes it hit the ground 100% of the time, right? And then they get into school and then they start to learn about the principle of gravity, and then they can realize, oh, that's why that happens. That's why if I lean too far on my bike, I fall over. That's why if I open my hand, this thing falls to the ground. That's why when I'm walking, if I trip, I'm going to hit the ground because of gravity, right? So it's pre-existing. It was true before we even knew it. It was true before Newton had the apple hit him in the head, as it were. Principles are constant, and the constant is that 100 times out of 100, when I open my hand, this sucker's going to hit the ground. 100 out of 100 times. Principles are constant. They never change. There's at no point will I open my hand and this thing will float to the air. You're right? And unless I'm in a spaceship, but we're talking about being here on planet Earth, right? And principles are invisible. We can't see gravity, but we can see the effect of gravity. We can see the result of gravity. But gravity itself, we can't see it. It's totally invisible to us. Gravity as a principle is universal. It's true for everybody. It doesn't matter whether you are neurodiverse. It doesn't matter your gender. It doesn't matter your religion. It doesn't matter your faith. It doesn't matter male, female. That goes under gender, doesn't it? It doesn't matter who you are. If you're a person or an animal or a tree or a rock, doesn't matter. If you're on planet Earth, gravity applies no matter where you are. Even in the ocean, gravity applies. It's just you have two forces against you at that point. You have buoyancy and gravity, but at no point when you're in the ocean do you fly off into space. Doesn't happen. Principles are descriptive. They describe how something works. So gravity describes why, when I open my hand, this hits the ground. Gravity describes why, if I throw a ball up in the air, eventually it will come down. It's a description. It doesn't tell you how to use gravity. It just describes to you how it works. And the next word is explanatory. So again, it explains. So it describes how it works and it explains why it works. Liberating. It's liberating to know about principles, because once you know, once Newton had that apple hit him in the head and it was revealed to him about gravity, that became liberating. We could do so many things. We could put planes into the air. We could put hot air balloons into the air because we had the knowledge of the principle of gravity. There's some liberation there. It's fundamental. It just is. It just is. If you are going to put a plane into the air, then you need to have some understanding of gravity and lift and thrust in order to put a plane into the air. You have to start with the fact of gravity, that the earth is going to pull you back down to it no matter what. It's unchanging. There's no change to the principle of gravity. Now, again, you could be in deep water, you can be in the ocean, and there's buoyancy working against you as well, so that will want to pull you up. But the fact of gravity doesn't change. Again, at no point do you fly into the space when you're in water. Principles are observable. We can see the effect. If I open my hand, I can see the effect. I can see this thing fall 100 times out of 100. I can observe it 100 times out of 100. And it's true for everyone. You don't have to believe in gravity for it to be true for you. You don't have to know about gravity. You could be a baby who knows nothing about gravity, but it still applies to you because it is a fundamental law of nature. Okay? So when we're talking about principles, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about fundamental, observable, constant, never changing. That's it. It's how it works. Now, something else about principles that I've come to realize and learn is that they get uncovered. People don't necessarily discover principles, they become revealed to people. Like when Newton had the apple hit him on the head, he didn't make up gravity. Gravity was before Newton had his realization, but it was uncovered to him. It was revealed to him. He realized in that moment whatever he realized that led him to the law of gravity, right? Thrust and lift and drag for getting an airplane into the air would have been revealed to somebody. I don't know who, because I don't have the history on that, the research on that. But if you look at most laws of nature, we don't necessarily know them. We see the effects of them, but at some point it becomes revealed to us. And when a law of nature becomes revealed to us, our paradigm changes. The way we see the world changes. And one way to see this is with germ theory. And there's a story I learned about from one of my teachers about a gentleman who realized, and he was at the very beginning. It was revealed to him at the very beginning of germ theory that there was something creating illness and death in women giving birth. And they tried all kinds of outside in ways of eliminating death of women having babies back in the 1800s. But none of those outside in ways worked. They thought maybe women were getting scared because the clergy were coming through to give last rites to other women who were dying. They thought it was curdled mother's milk. They thought, all these things that they thought might be creating it, nothing ever stopped it. And it wasn't until this doctor's assistant got sick with the same illness that he realized something was amiss. It wasn't just mothers dying. They called it birthbed death, I think they called it. And it's what we now know as sepsis. So basically, there was a blood infection that was created somehow. And this gentleman died of this illness. And that's when there was the first clue. It was revealed to this doctor that something else was going on. And what he discovered was that there was something about the instruments or the way they were handling their hands and their clothing and the bedding that was creating this problem, this infection. And this was before people knew about washing hands, having sterile instruments, having sterile or at least clean bed sheets. They were doing autopsies on people and then wiping the tools off on their vests and their jackets, and then going and delivering babies with the same tools. Now we know it's obvious. You don't do that. You wash your hands. Everything needs to be sterile. But at one time, that was not known. They had no idea. They thought it was evil spirits and things like that that were creating illnesses and death because germs were invisible. Bacteria were invisible. Viruses were invisible. They couldn't see them. They could see the effects of them, but they didn't know what was creating it until it was finally revealed. And the fascinating thing is now we know better. The paradigm has changed. But in the beginning, people thought this guy was a nut. And he wound up broke, penniless, and dying in an insane asylum because he tried so hard to get people to see this, and they just wouldn't. They just wouldn't. So it's fascinating how a lot of times discoverers of principles kind of suffer for trying to bring their principles into the world. And you can see this with other people who, Copernicus, who discovered that the sun didn't revolve around the earth revolved around the sun, and he was persecuted by the church because what he had to say went against their teaching. So we evolve. We just start to see something new. We start to see new paradigms. Principles are revealed to us, and then we see the world in a whole new way. And that still happens today. And these three principles of mental well-being, of how the mind works, fits right into this story, this process, because right now, as a whole, we tend to look at trying to fix behavior for people to get mentally well, as opposed to realizing that behavior is a product of thought. Now, we see it to a degree, but we think that we have to manage and manipulate the thinking that's in our head in order to change the behavior. We're not going far enough upstream. We're not going to the basic principles of how the mind works. And these principles were I'm just going to tell you what they were. They're called mind, consciousness, and thought. Now, mind, consciousness, and thought are just words because we have to have a word to point to what we're talking about. And when I describe what these principles are, it may very well be that you have different words for them. And that's okay, because it's not about the word that I'm using, it's about what I'm pointing to. So if you take the word rose, for example, I have some roses here, some silk roses. The word rose is just a word to describe a flower. But the word rose does not describe the experience of the flower. It doesn't describe the scent, the feel, the visual, right? If I say rose, right now this might come into your head because I've got it in my hand, but if not, something may come into your head that doesn't come into my head. Maybe you think of a red rose or a pink rose or a big rose or a little rose. Rose is just a word to describe, right? Same thing for mind, consciousness, and thought. They're just words. So don't get hung up on the words, is what I'm trying to say. So let's look at these principles that are constant and observable and true for everyone. And the first principle of mind is basically stating that there is an intelligence. There is an intelligent energy that creates. You could call it the energy of life. You could call it God. You could call it source. You could call it spirit. You could call it nature. You could call it life. Again, the word doesn't matter. But you know what it is. You know that when you feel your chest, you feel your heartbeat, you know you're alive. You know that there's energy running through you. If you've ever seen something that is no longer alive, something or someone, then you know that that spark of life is no longer within that thing or that body, right? That's what we're talking about. We're talking about that intelligent energy that knows how to run everything, everything. Even our own bodies. There's things about our own bodies and our own brains that we don't know anything about. We didn't create this. We're trying to reverse engineer and figure it out. And we're still discovering new things all the time because we didn't create it, but something did. So that something is what is meant when we point to the principle of mind. The second principle is consciousness. And consciousness is simply our capacity to be aware. Be aware of our experience, be aware of our surroundings, be aware of our spiritual connection to mind. It's just simply our ability to be aware. And this capacity to be aware brings to life in our bodies our experience, what we're experiencing, which leads us to the third principle of thought. Now, most of the time when we think about thought, we think about the content of our thinking, what I'm thinking, past memories, future worries. We think of those kinds of things. But what the principles point to is that there is a creative energy that is a part of that energy of life that allows us to create our moment to moment experience. And it comes to us via this principle of thought. Without thought, we would have no experience whatsoever. And thought and consciousness combine to make up every experience we have in our bodies. Without an awareness of what's happening in our bodies, we have no experience. Without a thought about that awareness, we have no experience. They are two sides of the same coin. They are inseparable. In fact, all three of these principles are inseparable. They are foundational. They are basic. They explain exactly how we work. And the fun thing about it is you don't have to believe it. You don't have to know about it. You don't have to believe it. None of it. It's just true. But the cool thing is, if you look, you start to see that it is true, right? That every experience that we have, how we experience everything we experience, is down to how we think about it and our awareness of it in the moment. In other words, you can't have an experience of something you're not aware of in this moment. You can't. I can't either. So let's give an example. If I were to say to you, imagine a pink bunny will pop into your head. 2 seconds ago, before I said that, that pink bunny was not in your awareness. You were not having an experience of it at all. If you start to tell me a story about something that upset you once upon a time, you will start to feel upset as you tell the story. 5 seconds before you told the story, you weren't upset. The reason you get upset is because you're thinking about a situation that made you upset, and that creates the experience of upset in your body. It's really kind of cool to recognize that that's all that's happening for anybody, everybody, all the time. We're only ever here in this moment. Our bodies are only ever here in this moment. And we can only ever experience whatever happens to be floating through our mind in the moment. So there are a ton of implications to these principles. Far too many to share in this video, but it's what I'm going to be sharing going forward. And hopefully today I stood by Sid Banks's 4 pillars of sharing the principles, which was keep it simple. I just tried to do the best I can to be simple. Wow, that just went right out of my head. Look within, look within. So I did my best to look within myself and just share what I know, what's true for me. It's a feeling. I've done my best to try to stay grounded and to feel, to just kind of let whatever wanted to come through, and then give it away. I'm giving you what I understand. I'm just sharing with you how I understand it to the best of my ability through the feeling of groundedness and just truth that I see for myself. So hopefully that resonated. Hopefully that came through. I know that it's possible that some of the things I'm sharing may seem really obvious to you. That's cool, because the truth is, we all already know this. Just like the baby that knows that when they knock that toy off the high chair, it's going to hit the ground. They know this. You know this. But what may not be quite as obvious is that this is at play in your life 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, from the day you're born till the day you die. And maybe before, maybe after, who knows? But we can always come back to this foundation that no matter how we're feeling, it's always being created in our minds, in the moment, via thought, brought to life in our bodies through consciousness. Always. That's always what's happening no matter what the circumstance is in our life. How we think about it is going to determine how we feel about the circumstance. The circumstance itself can never make us feel anything. And because we are the thinker, we get to decide what to think and what not to think. These are some of the implications of these principles of mind, consciousness, and thought. And there's a line over here. One of the words over here was liberating. And to me, understanding these principles has been completely liberating. Because if I'm in a bad mood, or if I'm feeling stress, tension, or upset, and I can remember, if I can wake up to the fact of the principles, then I know that that tension, stress, and upset is coming from within me, from whatever thought I'm having in the moment being brought to life by consciousness in my body in the moment. And that's all that's ever happening. That allows me to step back, take a breath, let the snow globe settle for a second, and have something new and fresh come to mind, right? That's the liberating bit. The liberating bit is that no one can ever make me feel, no thing can ever make me feel something I'm not thinking. Isn't that cool? I mean, I just think that's so cool. Anyway, that's what I have for today. Hopefully some of that made sense. Please listen to this more than once. Go back to it. Check it out. Get reflective. Don't try to figure out what I'm saying, but relax and ask yourself, can I see this in my own life? Can I see these principles in action? Because I promise you, they are always in action. They are constants. They don't change. They've always been at work. They'll always be at work. There's nothing we can do to get more or less of them. There's nothing we can do to apply them. They just are. Like gravity, we don't apply gravity. Gravity just is. And it is no matter what. Whether we see it, whether we believe it, whether we like it or not, it just is. And what I'm suggesting here is that these principles of being alive, aware, and thinking just are. So check it out for yourself. Don't take my word for it. Play with it. Get curious. See if you can see it in your own life. And see if anything changes as a result. That would be the insights, the aha moments, the epiphanies. Those are the things that usually come once we start to see these truths for ourselves, what I'm choosing to call truth. All right. Other than that, my friend, I hope you have a fantastic week, and I will come back next week with a topic that will probably be talking about the implications of the principles, because really everything in our lives is just an implication of the principles. So we'll talk about that then. Have a great week. I'll talk to you later. Bye.